heart and mind, right? My brain, my heart, my logic, my emotion. Which one is more important? And let's just say, for the sake of an argument, 5-year plan. Do I need to lean more into the emotion or financials? Is one more important than the other? Are they both equally important?
That is the heart and the mind, isn't it, right? People who are very emotional or people who are led by their heart are going to tell you, and I agree with that, the brand is absolutely the most important thing. If you're a marketer, how do I think about my audience, think about my customers, think about my supporters? How am I really delivering the best experience for them? How am I engaging them? But on the flip side, we're practical people. You have to be able to deliver certain metrics, some of it being revenue. So you really want to make sure that you're baking both in. There are things that happen opportunistically, but having kind of a 5-year or a 3-year or a longer term idea of where we're taking things together, I think helps you navigate tough times, helps you navigate when you have tough decisions. They become a little bit easier, and also helps you navigate and make better decisions when something comes along that's opportunistic. So it is both. It is really hard to pick one.
Today, I spoke with Jennifer Roberti, and she is the Chief Marketing Officer at Save the Children. Their mission is to improve children's lives through better education, healthcare, and emergency aid. Jennifer shared with me her foundational belief. This is her narrow lane, that a great 1-year marketing plan should actually be based on a 5-year vision. So in other words, what she's saying is that a 1-year marketing plan is actually the first step that delivers on that multi-year vision that's shared by the whole organization, not just by marketing. And Jennifer believes that this 12-month marketing plan is about 2 elements, and this shouldn't be a surprise. And yet, we sometimes forget about this. Element number 1 is brand building, the emotional side of marketing, with targets around soft metrics such as an increase in brand awareness, and also revenue growth, the logical side of marketing, with hard metrics such as growth in ROAS or enterprise revenue growth. And look, many things in life are basic, and we know them, and yet sometimes we forget about them. If I came up to the ranks as a brand marketer, I'm naturally going to be biased towards brand marketing. And if I came up through the ranks through performance, I'll be naturally biased towards performance. I am personally in that latter category. I grew up in the 90s, and performance was the key driver that I was judged on. And I used to be very biased towards ROAS and revenue growth. But I've come to understand over the years that when you combine brand with performance, and that's exactly what Jennifer is talking about, then you get those outsized results in marketing. From Delve Deeper, this is Narrow Lanes.
Jennifer Roberti, welcome to Narrow Lanes.
Thank you.
What does it take to hold your nerve and stay true to a strategy as a marketing leader?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, there's you as a leader and what you need as a leader, how you think, how you operate. And then there's their context and your environment. I think having leadership around you, whether it's your CEO or your board, who are really committed to a long-term strategy or committed to marketing, who understand where you're going, who support you, and are able to support you in some risks. That's obviously really important. That's an environment that creates an opportunity for you as a leader to stretch in different ways. I think having a team that's really committed to a shared vision is important too, because you're not there doing all of the executional work. You're not there managing every aspect of the marketing and brand and communications plan. So you need to rely on a team that's bought in, who are working really well together. So that's the second element. Mm-hmm. And I think as a leader, being able to communicate a clear vision to all of these stakeholders, having done it a few times before, because every time you do it, you're more confident, you know, like, what could go right? What could go wrong? What do I need to watch out for? So I think those in a nutshell are kind of some of the main things that you need as a CMO because it is hard. There are risks along the way. There are things that go wrong. How are you set up both emotionally and contextually with your team, your colleagues, your leadership to kind of navigate those bumps and those successes?
Let's imagine that I am a marketing leader who operates in an environment where that context is missing. Maybe I'm new to a role in an organization that wants to go to a transformation.
Yes.
And I have a vision, a long-term vision for my brand, but that context that you spoke about is missing. What do I do to hold my nerve, to stick to my guns in what is probably a challenging situation, but it also is full of potential?
Well, that is definitely a tough situation to be in. I think when I've experienced folks that maybe didn't understand what the long-term vision was, weren't clear about what the value is that it would bring to the wider organization, what I've thought about is how do I break this down? How do I show some small wins? How do I explain, here's 2 or 3 things that we're going to do together? Because we're going to pick as an organization 2 or 3 things we're really going to focus on, that we will really want to drive the needle. And how do I demonstrate, and even in small increments, like if we do this, we'll get this kind of an end result. And sometimes in contexts or environments where people don't really understand marketing or they're not clear on what the value is to them, being able to show and even one small proof point is really helpful in getting people to buy in, because you can't do it alone. If you're leading the charge and a long-term vision and your leadership, your colleagues, the board, your team aren't behind you, that's just really, really not going to work.
Can I convince the organization that having a long-term vision is important by having those small wins? Or do I need to have that vision first and then align small wins with it to get that buy-in? Is there the right way to start?
That's a great question. I think sometimes it depends. I mean, you have to have the long-term vision. You have to find some allies that you can talk to about it, torture test it with. What do you think is going to work here? What do you think doesn't make sense? What am I missing? Where do you need to get some support for it? And then, well, you know what? I could get support over here if I can demonstrate the connection between what we're trying to do and other parts of the business's objectives.
Why do I need to torture test that vision? I would imagine that it's actually supposed to be a pleasant process. Torture testing doesn't invoke a pleasant sensation in me personally.
Well, I think you always have to question your strategy. I've been in situations before where you become so enamored of your strategy and you're looking for ways to demonstrate that it's working. See, we're the best at this thing. Sometimes you have to take a step back and say, do we have the best strategy, or are we the best at operationalizing our own strategy? You always are going to be the very best, hopefully, at executing your own strategy, but taking that step back and saying, but do we have the best strategy out there for where we're trying to get to? That's a different kind of question, right?
That's why marketing is so tough. We have to be creative and we have to be numeric. We have to be in our head logically and in our heart emotionally. And we have to be opportunistic like you were with this 7-figure influencer. For me, it all does tie at some level to this idea of having something that's beyond 1 year. So maybe if being opportunistic and creative with how I go to market is part of my longer-term vision, my longer-term plan, I will allow myself, or I'll remind myself to be opportunistic versus mechanical. Is it important for marketing leaders, regardless of whether they are at for-profit or non-profit organizations, to have a longer-term plan? And what does longer-term mean to you?
I think it is important because you are dealing with so many different parts of the organization. You're dealing with, revenue. You have a responsibility to deliver certain revenue metrics to the organization. You are responsible for the organization's brand and brand reputation, for our share of voice in terms of media. So if you're not thinking about how I use all of those pieces, you're responsible for supporters, in many cases, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are engaged with your organization or your company or your business or your product. And if you're not thinking about how I pull all of those pieces together and keep them moving and keeping them additive. So the more I'm building my brand, the more I'm driving more revenue. If I'm driving revenue, how am I doing that in a way that's building my brand? So if you're not thinking about where you're trying to go, and it doesn't have to be 5 years, it could be, 3 years, it could be 20 years. But having an understanding of what the organization or the business's long objectives are and how you're building an external perception, reputation that is helping to drive that, and not just your revenue goals, but the entire organization's goals. You really have to think that way because it is dot connecting, again, going back to that.
To be able to dot connect between, let's say it's a 3-year vision or 20-year vision, like you said, and to then connect it with my annual plan, and then with how I'm going to run my weekly meeting this week and what I'm actually going to do this afternoon. Is that an example of dot connecting?
Yes, it is, but I think it's also an example to you said about heart and mind. Because,
Yes.
Again, managing a full stack marketing team, you're always going to have members of the team that are more focused on, metrics and data and my channel, and I'm driving my channel. And you're going to have other folks on your team that are more interested in the creative aspects or the brand. And how do I pull those guys together? How do we get the team humming together to think about, if I'm doing something that is driving our brand forward, is it also driving revenue? And the channel or the data-driven, the people who are driven by their mind, by their brain, to think about, hey, is this enhancing how we want to be perceived by different audiences? I often say, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And I know that there have been times where there's been pieces of content or there's been ads that we've had that have performed really well in terms of some of our fundraising metrics, but they weren't aligned with where we wanted to take our organization, what we said we want to stand for. And we've said together, no, we're not going to do that because we want to be able to do both things well. There was a time I was actually fired by an agency because they felt like there was a formula for TV to get people to make donations. And we felt like, but we don't like that formula. That's not the formula that feels authentic to where we're trying to take the brand and the kind of audience we're trying to build.
Heart and mind, right? My brain, my heart, my logic, my emotion, long-term planning. Which one is more important? Is it more important to lean into the emotion when thinking, let's just say for the sake of an argument, 5-year plan? Do I need to lean more into the emotion or the financials? And they're both important in marketing. Is one more important than the other? Are they both equally important? That
is the heart and the mind, isn't it, right? People who are very emotional or people who are led by their heart are going to tell you, and I agree with that, the brand is absolutely the most important thing. If you're a marketer, how do I, think about my audience, think about my customers, think about my supporters? How am I really delivering the best experience for them? How am I engaging them? But on the flip side, we're practical people. There's realities, that you have to be able to deliver certain metrics, some of it being revenue. And so you really want to make sure that you're baking both in. There are things that happen opportunistically, but having kind of a 5-year or a 3-year or a longer term kind of idea of where we're taking things together, I think helps you navigate tough times, helps you navigate when you have tough decisions. They become a little bit easier, and also helps you navigate and make better decisions when something comes along that's opportunistic. Maybe like the example I mentioned before, because if you're just thinking about like revenue, I'm going to take that 7-figure check. If you're thinking about both, you're going to say, I'm going to take that 7-figure check. I'm going to get a lot more eyeballs on my organization. and I'm going to raise even more money, and I'm going to really grow my file of supporters. So it is both. It is really hard to pick one.
Let's say I'm in a leadership role in marketing, and I either don't have a long-term vision, I actually don't know where I need to be in 5 years, or I do know where I want to take the brand and how I want to serve the audience and create maximum value for everyone. But I'm not sure that that's the right direction. I just don't know. I don't have all the answers. So either I don't know where I want to be in 5 years as a marketing leader, or I do, but I want some validation. What do I do to get clarity?
The most important piece of thinking about a long-term strategy or validating it is external. My recommendation is take yourself out of the organization, take yourself out of the internal dynamics, the internal context, and really give some thought to your audience. What are those insights there? What is the context telling you, and what are you seeing in your sector and with your primary audience over the next 5 years? Do some reading, talk to some people, because that's really ultimately your best guidepost. Listen, it's always important to think about internal stakeholders and get their perspectives. But in that case, if you're thinking, I don't know where I want to be in 5 years, or I might have an idea, but I'm not really sure how do I validate it, you really have to think outside in. That's your first part. Sometimes you need to be inside out, but for thinking about your strategy and where you want to be 5 years from now, you really want to start outside in.
I love the outside in. I think so often as people, we are so much in our head, and we are these story-making machines, and we create these stories about the reality that happens around us. Then as marketers, we spend most of our day at our desk in meetings, calls, creating decks, writing documents and emails. We forget to get out there and talk to the customers and talk to the donors and actually be the voice of customer. I remember years ago someone telling me, maybe again I was at Bath & Body Works or a bunch of startups in Manhattan, or I used to work at Digitas, and the voice of customer was something that we spoke about as an area that marketing is supposed to own. I think we get so confused as marketers about representing the customer. So I think I'm interpreting outside in as we are supposed to know who they are, what they're thinking, what they desire, and meet them where they're at, but also imagine where they'll be in 5 years. Is that it?
That absolutely is it. If the marketing part of the organization isn't focused on the customer, then who else is? There are lots of data points out there, and there's lots of how many visits to the website did we have? Our conversion ratio, mobile versus, there's a million data points, but those aren't really insightful. So how do I get really deep in what do our customers, what are our donors, what are our supporters think about us? What are they looking for? What are some of the aspects that might change the next 5 years? Am I ready for those? Am I thinking around the corner? And that's certainly a really important input into a strategy, because if you're only thinking about what's happened historically or how people have behaved historically, you're only going to have so much growth.
Looking around the corner, there's obviously, if I look around the corner, I'm actually blind to what's there. And yet, in any leadership position, including marketing, I need to imagine a scenario of the future with the market at large. Maybe if I'm a global brand, with the world economy and changes, shifts, my industry, my brand, my slice of customers. I can see how that's overwhelming and scary for me to have the nerve, that's where we started, to take a stand. It's almost easier to be tactical.
If you're looking at what has happened historically or what we know, And it's not necessarily an insight around our customers or our supporters. It's our own internal data that is driving decision making. In the not-for-profit sector, the average donor is a 65-year-old white woman who is progressively leaning and lives in 5 states. So if I'm using that data point and to think about my decisions both today and for the next 5 years or 10 years, that's really going to lead me to make some really specific choices and drive some really specific tactics that discards changes that are going on all around me or could be happening. If you want to be viable, if you want to think about, hey, is that a good strategy or is that the right strategy for me? How do I diversify the type of audience that is engaging with my brand? You're going to have to think differently. You're going to have to change up your strategy, and that doesn't happen overnight. How am I going to get there over 5 years, over 10 years? Because you're really making some significant changes in your approach. What kind of products you might want to offer? What is the tone of voice of your brand? What channels am I going to use? And that does take time. And if you're not thinking about how am I going to get there long term, and you're just doing it opportunistically or tactically, it's probably not going to be as effective.
We don't say, let's look behind the corner, looking backwards. We say, let's look ahead of ourselves at that corner that's coming up. Mm-hmm. But what I'm hearing you say, or what I actually think you're saying, I need to recognize and I need to maybe cherish and be thankful to that 65-year-old white woman in 5 states, because she may be carrying my brand right now. Mm-hmm. And this could be my donor profile right now. This could be my customer profile in any, whether I sell financial services or I sell shoes or apparel or I'm a travel company, it doesn't matter. There is a segment of customers. There's an audience that got to meet me to where I am today. And I think there is something about cherishing that actually.
Absolutely.
But also saying, and this is what Neo said in The Matrix, one of my favorite movies. And it wasn't Neo, it was Morpheus. Everything that has a beginning has an end. Mm-hmm. So there's a role for me to play as someone who's a member of my audience. And there are also these new audiences that I need to look towards in the future. Mm-hmm. And this does not have to be incongruent.
No, it's a continuum. Because we do cherish the 65-year-old individual who at that point in their life has the disposable income to think about charitable giving, for example, or buying your product as top of mind. But only addressing them at that point in their life or only paying attention and trying to engage right at that moment is in a way sort of short-sighted. What if instead you think about the 35-year-old woman and how am I going to build a relationship with them so that I'm not just knocking on their door or texting them or calling them or sending them direct mail or targeting them at that moment when they're, when I feel like they're the best prospect. What if I've built that relationship for 30 years, for 50 years, for 60 years? It's interesting when we would do research in January and February with people who had made donations at the end of the year, huge percentage of people would say, you know what, I trick-or-treated for UNICEF. And these were people that were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And that was the first time I had done something charitable, that I had acknowledged or was aware that I can do something for someone else. And it stuck with them all of these many, many years. And I think, how do you build that kind of long-term relationship?
I wonder if, as marketers, we remembered more often that we serve different audiences, that there's maybe, and there is obviously one larger message that we all have. Nike has it, JP Morgan has it, Save the Children has it, UNICEF has it. There is a bigger than myself, bigger than my brand message and aspiration I have. Mm-hmm. That, and let's call it brand, that I want all of my audiences to hear And there are also audience-specific emotional points, triggers. In the non-for-profit world, one would call it elements of affinity that I have to the mission. In the for-profit world, it would be, do I like these Colhan dress shoes because they're comfortable or because of the color or because they're ventilated? For me personally, these are elements of this brand, but there's a bigger message that Colhan has that I also connect with. Someone else may like these shoes for some totally different reason. So there's something about this bigger brand message and also segmentation. And maybe that's where we get confused, that we brand marketers think about one message for everyone, and almost data-driven, kind of classic database marketers think about segmentation, and it's both. And they're both right. It's both the 65-year-old and the 35-year-old and 22-year-old. It can be all part of the same long-term plan.
Well, absolutely, because if you're not thinking about the business objectives, when you're thinking about the brand, then you're missing a huge opportunity. MTN is the largest brand across Africa and the Middle East. That was a brand that was a company that began in 1994 versus a UNICEF, which is 75 years old, or Save the Children, which is over 100 years old. In that context, when you're talking about mobile telephony or a SIM card or data, it was becoming very commoditized. So you had multiple licenses being sold in countries. You're seeing the amount of money that you can charge per minute for voice or data continuing to decline. You're becoming a commodity. So how do you combat that? And if you're a marketer, you're going to be thinking about what are the products that I can be offering to make my product, my brand stickier? And then how do I build a brand where people are going to feel more loyal or more affinity when I'm making that decision in a commoditized environment? An environment or context like in the not-for-profit space, I think, it really is about what impact you're making, what the mission is. At Save the Children, we talk a little bit about how we position our brand, but for us, I think it's been more about creating a compelling brand voice. And how do we modernize a brand voice that was over 100 years old? For us, that meant making sure that when we're talking to any of our supporters, we're talking to them in a way that is unapologetic, bold, and authentic. That is the voice of our brand. That was the voice of our founder. So we took inspiration from a woman that lived over 100 years ago and her story, positioning our brand, and by using that personality as our brand voice, we actually made our brand feel more modern and relevant today.
My take is that, especially now, and I think it's lovely and refreshing, post-COVID, you said unapologetic, bold, authentic. I think we're all hungry for that. I think COVID, because it reminded us that family matters, friends matter, life is short. I think it's just very refreshing that we have allowed ourselves to speak this way. And I think that it would be easier if every marketing leader was unapologetic, bold, and authentic, that if we had clarity about that long-term vision we spoke about, again, 3 years, 5 years, 20 years. And then if we're able to translate that emotion, that objective, that target to what I want to accomplish over the next year. Because at the end of the day, I need to have a 12-month plan. How do I incorporate that emotion that you just shared, that's unapologetic, bold, authentic, into a 12-month plan?
We're going to start with the practicalities. At Save the Children, for example, and at UNICEF, we had targets that we needed to hit in order to make the impact that we wanted to make around the world and in the U.S. for children. And that means how many people are going to choose our organization to support in this year. There's all different kinds of ways to do that. You can do that by making a monthly donation, a recurring donation, by making a donation one time, by supporting the organization during a humanitarian crisis. So we're going to look at all of those numbers, and we're going to have a plan on what we need to hit across different channels, across different times of the year, because I guess maybe this goes back to the heart and the head. You know, the business side of your brain understands, hey, guys, team, here's what we're on the hook to deliver. Now, how you deliver that can be something that drives towards your long-term vision of doing it in a way that is outspoken, that is bold, that is talking to the 32-year-old and not just the 65-year-old, that is distinct from the ways that we have spoken about humanitarian crises before, or challenges like famines, or what it's like to be a kid in rural America during the summer. So that's where your ability to think creatively, how do I position that messaging? What's the voice I'm using? How do I change my approach to a campaign? One of the things that we did, which is really, I thought was really so interesting, was for years and years and years, and I spoke before about being fired by an agency for not wanting to follow the formula, and the formula for years very much was show someone suffering, you can help, call this number. I'm not even convinced that most people knew what organization they were supporting in that context. The team, using our brand voice and using our voice of the customer and insights, we thought to ourselves, you know what? What if we just demonstrated to people that kids can't be kids when they're hungry? Shouldn't that make you mad that today there are kids here in the US and elsewhere in the world that are experiencing everything from food insecurity to famine? And that's what really helped us to develop what was a campaign we called Get Fed Up. Instead of asking people to feel sad or feel guilty or feel sorry, is to really inspire an emotion of, shouldn't you be upset about this too? Don't you want to do something about it? And it's just kind of a sea change. And so it helped deliver the numbers that we needed to meet, and it helped drive our long-term vision of the brand we wanted to be.
On one hand, there is this absolute need for an emotional statement for the heart that's long-term. I was surprised actually when you said, when it comes to an annual plan, start with the logic, start with the numbers.
Yeah.
This need to combine the emotion with the numbers, and they're both important. Maybe this is self-serving, but I feel that the CFO doesn't have that. They're about predictability and numbers. So is the COO. The CEO has to have both, I think, but I think the CEOs often get focused on metrics. And marketing is unique because you have to have both. And you almost have to approach it from both sides of the brain. So this is, I don't know what you're hearing. This is more of a statement I wanted to make. I don't know if you have a reaction or not, but that's why I love marketing personally.
Absolutely. And I think that's also part of the looking around the corner. Another example I'll say is, when we're starting with the numbers and we're looking, because that's what history is telling us. Okay, so doing more or less the same is going to kind of deliver X. I want to deliver X plus. We want to deliver X plus as a team. So that's where the magic, that's where the creativity happens. You're looking at things where we were having a conversation a couple months ago, and there was something that we were doing that had a 6-month return on investment when we started this program. Then we looked at it more recently, and it's 12 months. The conversation we're having around the table is like, hey, in another year, it's going to be 24 months return on investment, which is still not terrible, but we need to start thinking now. Like, what do we do instead of this? Like, if you're waiting until the numbers aren't working, then you've waited too long. And that's what the forward planning's all about. That's what the 5-year plan or the 3-year plan or the long-term thinking, because you can't wait until a tactic or part of your kind of financial strategy is not working, you need to be thinking about it ahead of time.
I have to have one of my legs in the present and one in the future.
Yeah.
When you say that, I go back to segmentation. This is that's how I was brought up when I started in digital in '99. I was at Digitas, and Digitas actually was originally a direct mail shop, and they used to be called Bronner Schlossberg Humphrey. And that's how they cut their teeth on direct mail with Amex, actually. And I really like that. Because when I think about segmentation, it reminds me that I can have one of my legs in one segment that maybe is established and my other leg in the future segments. And it's this constant shuffling, adding new, testing, adding new, while also supporting my organization of the existing. That's what gives me relief when I hear you talk about this tension about looking at the corner.
Yeah, because it's what I need to deliver is one aspect. Maybe that's what the CFO is going to be focused on, or the CEO. How I deliver it, or how we deliver it, is the exciting piece. That's the creative part of it. And I think that's where you have an opportunity to create some of that, but it's a healthy tension.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But it's a tension. And tension, by definition, if I'm hanging on monkey bars, right, and I feel tension in my shoulders, it does make me a little uncomfortable. But it also builds muscle, makes me stronger. I know I'm being philosophical, and I get accused of using strange analogies sometimes. So this is an analogy. But tension is both healthy, but it's also a little uncomfortable. Looking where I came from and looking ahead, yeah, it's a little confusing to be both emotional and logical, to look to the past and the future.
Well, you have to. I've never really told anyone this, so this might be a little bit crazy. I oftentimes think to myself, you've seen those movies where you watch the astronauts or the fighter jets, and there's 500 buttons or levers, and if you push this one, the plane moves this way, but then you've got to adjust. I think sometimes that's what it feels like, because there's so many options in front of you. There's so many choices that you have. There's so much data that's coming at you. And I think sometimes the role of the CMO is I'm pressing this lever because I'm really focused on acquisition right now. But oh my goodness, we've gone too far, and we're creating a lot of churn. So now I got to make sure I've got my retention and engagement lever. I'm kind of pushing on that pedal a little bit. It's really keeping all of it in balance, because there's not one single foolproof solution. Another example I'd give you is that, when you're talking about tension or, thinking ahead or thinking around the corner, it was long before my time, but Save the Children was the very first not-for-profit to accept cryptocurrency.
Huh.
So I think starting in 2013.
It's early.
Really early. And there were years and years where we raised, I don't know, a couple $1,000s in cryptocurrency. But we kept accepting it. We kept investing in it. And all of a sudden, one year, we had $5 million in donations in crypto. I think that was in 2022. And then we hit a crypto winter. So what do? Do you abandon it? But, do you keep moving forward? We've invested. I really have to say it takes a tremendous, I think they should be applauded, to continue doggedly believing in something for, 6-7 years with almost no return. That's really thinking around the corner.
If I was a CFO and I heard this, or if I was a marketer and I was speaking to a CFO, and the CFO said, but I want predictability, because they often do, I would think about the fundamental concept behind diversification in investments. And I would say, well, some investments are blue chips, let's say S&P 500. Some are high risk. Some are these startups I put money into. And that's exactly the same strategy as me going after crypto, which is, let's say, a high-risk thing that I do as a tactic, but it can pay off, versus making sure I accept Visa and MasterCard, which is always going to be probably true, versus some other things I'm going to do. Finance and marketing are very similar because this idea of diversification and having eggs in different baskets, tactics in different segments is kind of the same. I wish marketers had more when thinking about the long-term plan and when thinking about what I'm going to do this quarter. I wish we had more chutzpah to say, how is this different from finance actually? Which is both creative and super, super tangible and profit-driven.
That really resonates with me. I mean, finance is about making smart strategic choices, and it is about diversifying how you're spending your dollars and knowing when do I double down, when do I pull back. And it's not always easy. You don't always get it right. And I think that's why we look at where are things that are still doing okay, but we know 3-5 years from now are probably not going to be growing. So how do I pull out of those and move into something that I think or we think is going to, drive more growth for us longer term or engage more people? And those are bets. And you need to make those bets with your CFO.
These are not easy conversations. Back when I was managing brands, if I went back to the CFO and I said, obviously a high risk strategy or high return expectations come with high risk strategies, right? I don't get high returns with low risk. Yes, 100%. So why am I expected as a marketer to have a bold 5-year strategy that's authentic and groundbreaking that will make us competitive, continue to make us competitive, and yet you're asking me to be safe? You would never ask your financial advisor to deliver high returns with a safe strategy. Why am I judged this way? If I was a marketing leader now and I knew what I know, I would absolutely tell him or her that, because I think they would need to, maybe they would listen. And they would allow me then to have a bold 5-year plan that's also grounded in reality, but it's really grounded in fundamentals of like how money is invested actually, that CFOs understand. That's just my sort of, reflection after 25 years of marketing. Like I wish I knew that 10, 15 years ago. I wish more marketers thought this way. So I'm projecting something. That's a belief of mine. Now, imagine that you are where you are. You've been in marketing for a couple decades. And you're talking to a peer about this exact topic, about this need to marry the long term with the short term, the mind, the logic with the heart. Does one thing bubble up for you think would give you comfort, would put your mind at ease? Maybe it's a memory, maybe it's a concept, maybe it's a situation, maybe it's an experience you had where you feel at peace with this tension being there.
You got to take some big swings. And you've got to be prepared to maybe make some misses. Hopefully you can manage those, because understand that it happens. But you're not going to have a big win without taking some big chances. And when I've looked back at the decisions that I've made, I feel like whether they're personal or in different contexts and different roles, being passionate about where we're going and taking some risks or a chance on something, you kind of never regret it, even if it doesn't work out, because you've learned something really important. And you may not always convince everyone, and that's okay too. Understanding what the risk is and being prepared to take it and bringing other people along with you, and also bringing other people and being transparent about when it didn't work. That's the journey. That's why we're here. No one's going to get it right all the time.
You obviously have had a long career with nonprofits specifically. Save the Children right now, UNICEF before that. What I see with nonprofits today is what you mentioned earlier, which is our core donors are getting older, younger audiences, people in their 20s, 30s, whether that's Gen Z or millennials. Mm-hmm. They are distracted, and yet they want a connection with something bigger than themselves. And the classic giving pyramid, to me personally, seems broken. Mm-hmm. It's out of balance. It's not a pyramid. It almost feels like it's the reverse pyramid. Top is heavy, bottom is light. And it's a little wobbly. Is it?
I'm going to answer your question a bit differently. So I would say I always think about my career in thirds, and I'm going to talk about it because I think it's really important because it really has influenced the way I think about these things. So I spent the first third of my career in an advertising agency, a WPP agency, working with some really amazing folks, got a great grounding on some wonderful big brands, working with industry leaders. Then I spent a third of my career in the private sector, working in mobile telephony across Africa and the Middle East. And I'm bringing that up because it's actually very similar, both in terms of marketing strategies and even kind of the business modeling as not-for-profits. So if you look at mobile telephony, not in the U.S., but in other parts of the world, it is a month by month. It's pay as you go. It's not, I have a recurring, someone's going to bill my account every month. When they started some of these mobile telephone companies, they really believe we don't really have a market here other than people who are kind of the top, 10%. We have a business model that we're going to have 100,000 customers. Well, organizations like MTN, when I joined in 2004, had 16 million customers across 6 countries. When I left in 2015, they had 235 million customers in 21 countries because they realized that they really needed to rethink their business model. It wasn't about going after people who could give them a safe, secure monthly subscription and going after the top, 5, 10%. It was really making sure that mobile telephony was accessible to everyone in the most remote corner. How do I develop a $10 smartphone so everyone has access? How do I get them to build businesses off of this? Now, you might think to yourself, well, what does that have to do with not-for-profits? But when you think about the way that not-for-profits are business models are kind of geared, same thing. We have people who are monthly donors. So how do I acquire people? How do I get them to stay and continue to be engaged in my organization? Where do I invest? Do I want to go after the top 1%, the people who are going to write 5, 6, 7-figure checks? Or do I want a movement of people who are excited about and have an opportunity to engage with what we believe in, with what our mission is? It's obviously a little bit of both, but I think that at the end of the day, it's important that people feel engaged with critical issues impacting our society, both here in the U.S. and around the world. And we need everyone to feel like they're super engaged in that. Do I want to be involved in something that is exclusive and feels like it's for people who have a certain income and it's focused on specific kind of issues that aren't relevant to me? Or do I want to be involved in an organization that I feel like they're out there, they're making, an impact on important issues, both, in terms of time, in terms of the impact that they make and with their programs, and in terms of how they advocate for change. So it's easy to get focused on, a certain audience and a certain segment, especially one where you feel like, hey, of course I'm going to go after this audience. They have all the disposable income, but then you're fishing in a smaller and smaller and smaller pond. And when you're talking about, social impact and making the world a better place, don't you want to have an ocean of people?
This totally makes sense to me. Your MTN example with telephony and how it relates to nonprofits, I get it. I think how I translate it is whether I'm a for-profit or nonprofit organization, again, back to segmentation, I have different customer segments with different value. And some of them are early in the maturity with my brand, and some of them are mature. And some of them I need to be willing to invest into and grow the base of the pyramid, grow the base of my customers. And others are those who like you said earlier, are 65-year-old and they're the bulk of my revenue today, but they will not be the bulk of my revenue in 20 years because they're literally going to die. And the people who in their 20s, they are the future. I get sad when I see nonprofits forget about that. It feels unhealthy when I can't operate in both realities. And to me, the Giving Pyramid, which has been around forever, but it does speak to the balance. And we forget about it.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, and, we didn't even talk about it, but, we're also looking at one of the greatest transfers of wealth ever. And you see more and more that even people who do have the means to make, large contributions, whether it's family foundations or we're talking about this kind of wealth transfer, you're seeing younger and younger generations taking more of an active role in how those decisions are being made. So you really need to think much more broadly.
See, that's why something that I think about, something that we think about at Delve, is that major donors have an individual giving officer. I call them the handlers. I have those, right? There are organizations that I donate $50,000 to, 10,000, and there's $20 a month. And I have handlers. The moment you donate 10,000 a month, you get someone assigned to you to handle you, to make sure you keep on giving and giving more. I get it. That makes sense. But what if I could give an individual donor, a mass donor, who is at the bottom of the giving pyramid, an experience of having that handler? I read a report from McKinsey that said that 72% of consumers right now, of people, expect a personalized experience. Why? Because Amazon, Netflix, Spotify taught us that we are an individual who deserves to have an individual experience. And I think it's fascinating that non-profits know that, but they forget about it. If I aspired as a nonprofit to deliver individual level of content, of communication, of messaging that resonates with my affinity, would that change how I think about the giving pyramid?
It probably would. I think we're really close to getting there. I mean, I think with technology, with AI and other things I think a lot of not-for-profits, and you talked about investments and CFOs and other things, it is an investment, but it's becoming an investment that's more and more in reach with, smaller and smaller not-for-profits. I think, that's going to, I think in the next 5 years, because I know that we talk about personalization a lot, even for the $20 a month donor. How do I build that customized journey? Or if you come onto my website, I know exactly who you are and I'm delivering that personalized experience the way that Netflix does or Amazon does. I think that is the end goal, and I think we will get there.
And what I worry about is someone who has been around for 25, 50, 75 years as an organization being stuck because they're looking behind the corner and they're not looking ahead. And it would be a shame because what they do is so meaningful. And I read this research the other day that, and I'm quoting, younger generations' wealth and philanthropic capacity are on the rise, but their loyalty to every particular organization is lower. If I'm a nonprofit, how do I get someone in their 20s to start to be loyal, to use that word, to my mission?
There is no, single answer to that question. I think you want to try lots of different things. We've tried lots of different things. I mentioned crypto. We also have been heavily involved in gaming and streaming. So what are the channels? Where do I invest? Even though I'm not going to get kind of the same level of donations or return that you're going to get with, maybe other types of donors. You have to understand that you're in it for the long haul. It's the kind of messaging, it's the kind of content, it's the kind of issues that you're engaged with. So you want to think about all of those pieces if you are going to. You also have to have great insights, by the way, too. So we invest a lot in understanding our supporters or potential supporters, what they think about certain issues, how do we talk about them. One of the things that we did that I think really helped flip a switch for us, too, as an organization, it goes back to the metric side of this, is it's easy to say, how do we diversify our supporter base? So we're going to make that happen. All right, but you've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that are existing supporters. So it's like a drop in the bucket. You're not seeing any movement. What we did instead one year is to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. And I can't remember the exact number, but it was like 15 or 20% of all new acquisitions are going to be, younger or more diverse than our traditional supporters. So we're going to really focus on driving that metric.
And you have a hardcore metric.
And
goal.
over time, we've seen the needle move on our total supporter base. But it was like trial and error. It was trying different types of tactics, looking at different channels, being really clear with the team that it's going to take a while to completely shift who is supporting you. But if we can, like year by year, channel by channel, really be committed to saying, okay, at least 15%, you're going to see some progress. You're going to see some momentum, and then that gets people excited. And then that shows we can do it. So now how do we do it again?
Two things come to mind. One is, in any portfolio, if I have 80% of my money in things that are safe and deliver return and 20% in risky things, that's probably not wrong. If I have 80% of my marketing effort in customers or donors who drive revenue, doesn't mean I have the permission to have 20% to experiment with. You said 15-20. We didn't rehearse this. So why would this be different when it comes to, yes, every year, maybe 20% of my donors are new. Maybe they represent 3% of my revenue, by the way, net new revenue. Yes, because the revenue per donor is lower. But some of them, and you said this earlier, maybe the kids of someone who is wealthy. And now when they inherit that wealth because of the wealth transfer, they will be willing to give to this nonprofit because when they didn't have money, affinity was created, loyalty was created. Or if I am someone who didn't come from means, and now in my 40s, 50s, 60s, and I have come into money because I worked hard, I will also remember all this nonprofit. So I need to almost have a different horizon maybe for different audiences. Maybe at the bottom of the pyramid, it's about engagement and a 10-year payback. And at the top, it's about 6-month payback. That's how I think about it. It's all strangely logical, actually, and yet it requires like an emotional leap of faith.
Yes, you have to be willing to have a leap of faith. And we also have certain types of customers or certain types of donors that are tried and true that we know is that 80%. And again, it's about balance. It's about looking at your portfolio. It's about making sure that you're meeting kind of what you need to meet every year, but also thinking about how am I shifting everything to be prepared, to be vigilant about what's coming around the corner, about what things are going to look like 5 years from now. Because anyone has, I think any marketer has channels or products that if you look at them, you know that, okay, this is working well now, but I'm seeing something. So is this going to still be, the most profitable, the best tactic for me 5 years from now? You
Probably
need to
not.
be having those questions.
Probably not.
You need to be asking those questions. When you talk about what do I do every year for my 12-month version, that's what you should be asking.
Yes.
And if something is delivering a certain return now, what do you think it's going to be doing 12 months from now? And why?
Again, that's why marketing is fascinating.
It's so much fun.
I know. The show is called Narrow Lanes because I have this point of view that to be obsessed about something, I'm also sacrificing something. And so when I think about a narrow lane, and I'm asking for your experience, share a narrow lane that I'm in the midst of personally, I have this recurring friction between obsession with work, which I just intellectually absolutely love. But the dark side is that, just like in Star Wars, right? There's a Sith and Jedi, there's a dark side, and there's Force. But the dark side of obsession with work is this constant feeling of failure at home, that I could be more present, I could be more focused on my kids, I could be spending more time with my wife. And that's kind of my journey right now, my narrow lane of obsession and the dark side that comes with. You don't have to share anything, or you can. Is there something that you are trying to get more in balance with between maybe your heart and your brain, between the emotion and the daily reality that is important to you today?
It does feel like so many people that you talk to, and myself included, it's just, how do I balance, my home life, my personal life? I think in some ways, remote work has made it harder because there is no boundary between your office and your home in some cases. I remember when I was commuting to the office in New York City from Connecticut, there was an hour train ride every day. And that was so helpful mentally because I know on the way home, and I would work, I'm sitting there typing away very diligently, having calls. But when the train doors opened and I'd arrived home, there was something about, okay, I'm putting everything away and now I'm at home. I think working from home or even in a hybrid situation, I've struggled with kind of creating that barrier between, especially in our jobs more than ever, you're managing social media teams, media comms, PR. Let's be honest, we're on call 24/7, working globally, so you're dealing with different time zones. That's always been a part of my work life. So I think that's been a struggle. And I would say I'm really emotionally invested as well in my job. So in some of the brands that I've been involved with, I think back, I was around and involved in the very, very early years of MTN, for example, which is now I still follow, they're always one of the top, brands in Africa. When most valuable, when I was there, we were on the Millward Brown top 100 global brands list. It was the first African brand that ever actually, you're writing the positioning, you're intimately involved in the identity, and working on how that's played out across many, many countries. I shed, blood, sweat, and tears for that brand. I actually was held up at gunpoint once at an editing suite. So, literally, it was part of my, was very emotionally invested. And, working for organizations and brands that have such an amazing impact on the world, and with teams as well, building teams as I did at UNICEF and Save the Children, you do become emotionally invested. It's a personal business. You're working with people, agencies are, and those relationships. And yes, I would love to figure out how to create more 9 to 5 distance between my work life and my personal life.
Jennifer Roberti, thank you so much for your time. This was a treat.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed chatting.